Hey there, Mallory Wilsey here, Chief Producer of the Enrollify Network. And I want to take just a moment to tell you about another show on our podcast network that I think you'll love. The EduData podcast is your no-fluff guide to the data driving higher education. Forget about data silos and disconnected stacks. Timothy Davis and Jamie Boggs, two of Element 451's data analysis experts, bring you straight into the heart of the numbers that matter. With sharp commentary and rigorous research, our hosts break down complex data points and actionable insights you can use. Whether you're an administrator, educator, or just a higher ed enthusiast, EduData is your key to unlocking the data behind academia. New episodes drop every Friday morning, and you can subscribe to the show by visiting podcast.enrollify.org or just search the EduData podcast wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, where each week we explore the impact of EdTech on the student experience with engaging, fun, and relevant conversations that honor the wide range of work happening all across the higher ed ecosystem. I'm your host, Dustin Ramsdell. I've been working in and around higher ed for the past decade, focused on student support and digital experiences. Join me every week for discussions with some of the best minds in education technology. The Higher Ed Geek Podcast is a part of the Enrollify Podcast Network, a robust collection of shows designed to help higher education professionals like you grow. Explore our other shows at enrollify.org or check out some of my personal favorites linked in the show notes below. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered all-in-one student engagement platform helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com. Welcome back, everybody, to another wonderful episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast. Excited to have a sort of rare return guest, Robert Lee, coming back to the show. Good friend and collaborator in sort of this content creation space in higher education. Always up to cool new stuff. And we're talking a bit about that today, talking about Professors FM and just sort of this larger effort that you are undertaking to engage more with faculty members and how they're sort of engaging with our communities that we live in and everything. I'll let you kind of speak to all the awesome work that you're doing there. But quickly, if you want to remind folks who you are and what you do and why you kind of, I guess, care so much about higher ed, like branding, content creation, podcasting and stuff, like what's sort of that core that drives you?
Yeah. First of all, Dustin, thanks for having me back on the show. It's been a while, but of course, I follow you a lot, and I'm always happy to see whenever you put a new episode and just seeing the growth of the show and just how you really support the higher ed community in so many different ways. So thank you, first of all, for providing this podcast for all the listeners. So Robert Lee, I am really deep in the higher ed podcasting world. I run a company called University FM, which is the higher ed podcast agency. I think we are like the primary one that only focuses on this space. And when we first started out, it was a combination of alumni podcasts, student podcasts, and now more and more into this faculty/research podcasting space, which is the new thing that we're working on that Dustin mentioned. But before getting into, Professors FM and what that means and what that entails, I am in this space because it really started when I was a student at the University of Michigan. I was a part of the radio station out there where I learned how to host on-air shows and interviews, learned how to mix music live, all that DJing stuff. Eventually got into audio storytelling. And it was just this recognition over time, conversations with my brother, Sean, who is a co-founder of this business, that there are so many impactful stories that come from higher ed campuses. Yeah, from a community building side with alumni and students, but also just in terms of greater value to society at large with research communications. And to me, there's so many great things that universities do that a lot of people just don't know about. Right? And I think podcasts are a wonderful tool to amplify the message and amplify the work that is being done in higher ed institutions and the value that they're providing.
Yeah, absolutely. just from like your background, like it is kind of like crazy to me and I'm very jealous that like I never got to host like a radio show and have that whole sort of experience because I think that it's just sort of like handling everything that comes at you when you're like even interviewing somebody in this sort of format where it's like we're doing it live on tape, but we get to edit it. We can like redo something if we need to, but it's like you got to be on your game. You got to, do all that. So I think that's such a good sort of boot camp, I guess, of audio storytelling.
Yeah. So really quick, because the radio station is WCBN 88.3 FM. All right. And the very first time I went live, I was so nervous. Even though granted, like online, you would know there are at least like 50 people listening to you live, in the car, who knows how many people. So it's just like, oh, wow. What am I going to say? You definitely have this moment where you might choke, but no, you get through it. So yeah, it was really nice training grounds. And I just came actually from Ann Arbor. So I was just tuned into the radio when I was in the area. So it's really nice. Yeah, it's really nice having that radio experience and kind of seeing the predecessor to podcasts.
Yeah, and I'll have to maybe just kind of discuss more of like sort of that emotion side of it. I think, as you've like engaged with faculty, but because I think that's obviously like some people just get nervous when they like step in front of a room of their peers and, you're at the front of the room and talking to everybody. It's that sort of just like public speaking fear that a lot of people have. And certainly it's kind of exacerbated when it's like, oh, I'm like live on the radio or on TV or whatever else, but that idea that like you're saying, the sort of core of it being like, and I believe this as well, is that everybody's got a great story to tell. And especially these like subject matter experts, these people have committed their lives to higher education and research and teaching and, all these sort of things. It's like, if you can kind of help them to push through whatever sort of initial anxieties and stuff, it's like, it's all just like time well spent because like communities benefit, just sort of society, everything, like just to remove some of those barriers. So with that being said, I guess like if you want to discuss sort of that core premise, the elevator pitch, what have you, of Professors FM as your newer sort of venture and sort of the suites of things that you do with institutions and how it came to be, because I guess like where that inspiration came from is kind of what I'm curious about. And then just, kind of the way that you sort of pitch what this is to people to kind of help them to get it.
Yeah, and just to distinguish it, so University FM, podcast, agency size, more production, marketing, consulting focused. And then Professors FM is a podcast network. So it is a network of shows that are all hosted by scholars. So this includes, yes, your professors and also your lecturers and researchers, more broadly speaking. And the core idea behind it is it's built not for the peer academic group. It's built for the general public, your average Joe. And the intent is with all these shows, any episode you listen to is breaking down research to make it accessible to the general public so that it's more relatable to them in their everyday life and they know and understand how does it apply or how can they apply it, right? Different principles from research, what they're doing. This idea came about because we started working on Professor Podcasts about 2 years ago, and then like last year we started doing a few more shows. And while we were doing these shows, we noticed a few unmet needs. So from a scholar, faculty side, many of them do want to publicize their research more, right? They want to have a wider reach, a bigger impact on society. And oftentimes, they'll ask for or request help from their marketing communications teams. And of course, marketing communication teams would love to help them do this, but it's just most of the time a matter of bandwidth. And okay, if you're going to help one professor with their podcasting needs, then you have to be able to commit some time to the other professors with their podcast needs. So it's a bandwidth thing. So that was one kind of unmet need, which is okay, professors, scholars want to engage more in public podcasting, but they don't always have the support to do that. And on the other end, I think from a listener side, more general public, there is a need, a want for information from well-informed sources, from experts. And there's not many places that you can get that easily. So yes, you could find it, in like research journals, but it's very rare that people would just go to research journals to read up on things. Sometimes, I think that's a big reason why people listen to like NPR. People listen to NPR, like you definitely learn something new. You hear a lot from experts, but it's like, why not have more of these NPR types, right? And we think about like influencers at large, there's a lot of people who don't really have the background, they really don't have the credentials, just speaking on topics that they have, frankly, misinformed opinions about sometimes, right? And that extends from sure the political world into the medicine or like medical fields or health advice, even into like financial advice, right, for your investments. You have a lot of these like hustle. I don't know, like in my world, like I see a lot of like hustle influencer types. So it's like, okay, why not just have more like professor influencer types out there?
Yeah, to that point, it is the idea of you see people where it's like, oh, I'm a productivity expert. This is how I sleep and all this. And it's like somebody could be like, that is actually really unhealthy. You should not be doing that. Like, you just need a better project management system. Don't be trying to life hack your way into being like, I just take little 2-hour naps. I don't sleep at all, like straight. I just kind of go through it. So, yeah, I think that's the idea. Is like we're now so awash in content that presents itself with a very sort of credible sort of sheen to it, but that, yes, people do yearn for something where it's like, like a faculty member who makes TikToks and is like very engaging and all that. Yeah, like how can we get more of that? Because I think people are yearning for it.
How can we get more of that? Right. So Professor FM created this with the intention to kind of meet both these needs. So the first one being the bandwidth side is, okay, well, we're offering our support from our own team from University FM to help with production or help identify podcast guesting opportunities for scholars, but also introducing and co-developing like a podcast training program with Emory University's Public Scholarship Center, right? And then on the other end, for the listener side, we want to be kind of like the go-to place for people who want to find relevant information that's supported by research, right, directly from the researchers. And that's what's really inspiring to me about Professors FM, is kind of serving its greater mission of public scholarship, be able to allow more research to be acted upon in a more timely fashion, inspire more thoughtful discussions, right, among the public. Really, and in some ways, like elevates the value proposition of higher ed institutions or just higher ed in general. Of course, right, in today's world, we're talking about this a little bit before. There's many headwinds, right, for higher education, and it would be a great win to see research communicated in more approachable ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and we're recording this May 2024. Like, there are just no shortage of headwinds and just bad headlines for higher ed, where there's FAFSA fiascos and campus protests that are being handled poorly, and just a lot of scrutiny just generally around the relevance and value of higher education. So it's like, try to get those wins. The idea that like a subject matter expert, a faculty member, a lecturer, or whomever can get out there, put out a message, engage with an audience, and the idea that like and I guess this will be sort of a follow-up question, is like that you imagine that this would allow for more sort of strategic alignment of like, okay, let's leverage our, faculty to get out there, put their voice out there and build an audience and everything, where like you're saying, like you might hear if somebody who's a faculty member at some institution on an NPR news story, like it's all very ad hoc, it's disorganized, and it's like you can't just say like, well, I want to listen to this one person's show, or I want to listen to faculty from this one institution, because like maybe I went there, maybe not, but it could just be like they do have a particular focus or some sort of institute or something like that's really interesting, so they want to obviously build sort of more awareness of what they're working on. So like, how do you see that strategic alignment piece of what you're doing that kind of starts to organize and focus efforts of like leveraging these faculty members to put themselves out there?
Yeah, we're trying very hard to align with the strategic goals of the faculty heads and research directors, and also from a marcom angle, aligning with the media relations folks, right? For us, we want to make it as easy as possible for scholars to get into the podcasting world, whether that means hosting their own show or taking a more basic step of starting to guest and get more kind of reps in with appearances. Right. There's so many great scholars who are great researchers, but not so great communicators because they're not trained in that way. And I think, in writing like a research paper, that's a very different way of communicating than just talking to somebody, I guess, like at a bar, right? If I was to use that example. So there's definitely, from a scholar side, some hesitancies, right, that are very valid. One being, oh, hey, I've never done any sort of, speaking about this, publicly. How do I refine my key messages? How do I break down my concepts into, into more simpler terms, right? If I say something wrong, like what happens then? So for us, okay, there's definitely some training aspects here where we can practice with them. We can give them some core principles or guidelines about how to communicate the research, right? And so that's making it easier for them. But also then want to help scholars identify speaking opportunities, because I think in the podcast space, what makes podcasts so good as a medium for communicating research is that they're so niche in some ways. Like, yeah, there are a lot of podcasts out there, which isn't really necessarily a bad thing. Each podcast has its own little community, right? And so if you're, I don't know, if you're doing research on like how ants structure their colonies, right? Organizational structure. Okay, yeah, we could definitely most likely find a podcast that's focused on this like animal kingdom, world, but also we could probably find a podcast that's more focused on like maybe the business principles of organizations. And okay, there's definitely some learnings to apply from the ant world or from the bee world, or some other animal. So that makes it interesting, right? That gives you an audience that's more focused. So that's really helping the scholar side. We'll make it as easy as possible for them to get involved.
Yeah, 'cause that's what, like I said, I wanted to kind of dig in with is that idea of like how you overcome those hurdles where like I could imagine it's coming from either way, where like you could be approached by, faculty head, some director, some department head or something,
Mm-hmm.
and they're saying like, well, this is something we'd love to do. A lot of my faculty members are doing amazing work, and you're like, great, awesome. Like, let's go chat with some of them. And you might have to convince them. It's like, you have an amazing thing to talk about. You talk about how like ants all work together and communicate and do these incredible things.
Mm-hmm.
And there might be like, I don't know, maybe. And like, you would have to convince them. And like, they could be like really good communicators, but they just maybe don't see those sort of like connections. They're like, well, you actually could talk about it and like sort of adapt it in a lot of different places. And I think people could find it really interesting. And they may be like, oh, okay, yeah. And then the other side is where it's like, I would love to do that. I'm completely self-aware that I have no idea how to talk about this in a way that would be digestible in a like 30-minute or less podcast or something. So I can imagine kind of either end of the spectrum where it's like, yeah, it'd be great to get our faculty out talking about what they do more. And it's like, okay. And then the other half is like, so who and about what? And are they like good communicators? So I think it is really smart that you've identified that it's like, we've got to help kind of like hone their skills and coach them and give them feedback and sort of support them through that, because if you sort of like neglected that side, it would be
and I think you bring up an excellent point. There's a spectrum of people who are naturally interested in doing this. The people who are told, hey, you should do more communications, and the people who are, yeah, I want to do more communications, but I just don't know how to, or like I don't know how best to, right? And within the spectrum, because also when I think about the media relations side, I think the idea itself makes a lot of sense. Like, yeah, okay, we definitely want more scholars out there in the world engaging with people. For the scholars who are a little bit more hesitant on the being told to do this side, I think there's probably a step before the podcast training, just some general podcast education about like what podcasts or how podcasts could benefit them. Right, because it's not always clear. I mean, the clearest thing is you're going to get more wide exposure to people, for your ideas. But by doing podcasts, in talking with scholars who do podcasting, they see benefits with their own research because as they talk about their ideas more and as they interview other people about similar topics, helps them build their own research during the research process. There's also instances where podcasts help build up the media kits of scholars for when they want to go to a book publisher, right, to pitch their book idea. It's just like more social proof, right? And then there's just this general application, just more practice, just being more comfortable with talking about what you do and why you're excited about what you do, right? And helping other people understand why you're so excited about it. So there's these other benefits to podcasting that are not as talked about, but they're there, right? And they're really great. So
Yeah, I appreciate you highlighting those because, yeah, I definitely would agree that like they're not as explicit or sort of maybe like immediate. Sort of, that idea that like, well, this could help me get a book deal a couple of years down the line or something is like, yeah, if you stick with it, you do it well, you distinguish yourself out there very publicly and people know you about, the thing that you love talking about or whatever, like that could sort of pay those dividends. 'Cause that's what even I feel like for me is like, yeah, I'm doing my own little sort of like niche thing. Like, I think there is some general, maybe like public interest in what I do, but even the idea of like, sure, that's all well and good, like have the biggest reach and whatever that you can, but there's all these sort of like less explicit benefits of like, I am out there, people know me for what I do, what I like to talk about, what I care about, and somebody again who just does like really care about this work and this field and all that kind of stuff. So it's like it can sort of create opportunities down the line because I've kept consistent with it. I've kept sort of top of mind, I guess, for things. And so I think that's a really good thing to sort of point to. But as we wind down, what makes you excited for this new challenge? I mean, you're sort of, I guess, seeing the trend as it was coming of like more faculty kind of reaching out and engaging and wanting to kind of explore this world. But like, this is sort of a new challenge to sort of formalize it and commit more to it. So this is a new challenge, a new opportunity. What's got you kind of most excited about it?
I think there's great potential for this. I think it has such a positive impact on society. One of the things that it does make you really excited about is it's institution agnostic. This is a podcast network with scholars coming from all types of institutions. And for us, we're also intentionally not just focusing on, say, the top 20 institutions, but the rest as well, because really great scholars or scholar communicators, they come from all different places. And to be able to have just one centralized source or place for all these great scholar communicators to come together, it'll just be such a rich pool of information. I kind of see it as like a combination maybe of like the breadth of Wikipedia and like maybe the depth of a TED Talk. And that's where we kind of want to land, that balance. And so people can come to Professors FM maybe wanting to learn about more like business marketing, but they then find interest in these other shows about philosophy or about the ethics of business, right? Or like business impact on the environment, right? There's so many ideas that are interconnected that a place like Professors FM, with all of them there, you can start seeing those connections. So that's what I'm really excited about, like being able to inspire more thoughtful discussion, help people explore different areas of knowledge to enrich their own lives and to be more creative and all of that.
Yeah, there is a beauty because I think that's something I know a lot of people have kind of remarked on of like that the internet as it's become more personalized and we kind of get into like our bubbles and stuff, like something like this. And like you said, like the other example, like TED has like TED Radio Hours, like a podcast forever. Like they're just, uplifting so many different kind of voices and perspectives and topics, like that ability to just like stumble upon things. So if it's like, yeah, like I'm, browsing a library of episodes or whatever, and it's just sort of like, oh, that's kind of interesting. Like I was looking for this topic, I found that. But then also like there's something kind of like tertiary like related to it. So yeah, that idea of like all those things you mentioned, but then that sort of just kind of like gooey, squishy sort of like emotional pieces. Like, yeah, it's like really cool that people can kind of have this place to go to. And it's the idea too, where like, I listen to a lot of podcasts. It's like, I'm always eager to find new shows and stuff to follow and just have in the feed. If it's like, oh, I've kind of dried up my playlist a little bit, let me like see what's new from, X, Y, or Z podcasts, and knowing that there's one that's, uplifting really great voices and perspectives from faculty members who do really cool things. And so I think there's just like a really great outcome from that sort of thing of like that ability to kind of like stumble upon stuff.
I mean, ultimately for the listener, we want listeners to feel inspired, more knowledgeable and more capable of applying that knowledge, right? So it's not just be inspired, it's not just learn something new, but all three of those and what can you do with information. And I think that's the core difference that we're going for in terms of how we go about communicating research.
Yeah, and that's like a good structure, I guess, like an outline they could kind of like plug things into, because it could be like some people out there, yeah, focus on one or maybe two of those things, or just like the novelty of like, hey, look at this fun little anecdote or fun fact, and kind of just like talking about that. But yeah, making it interesting and relevant and applicable to people's lives and everything. And also, I'll say, like, I just appreciate you as somebody, as we close down here, that is just an advocate for the medium, the sort of potential and the impact, the sort of strategic utility of podcasting. Because I was saying before we hit record, like if I ever see like episodes of different shows that I listen to, or anybody just talking about like how it can help with sort of, your brand strategy, how it can help with like engaging current prospective students, how it can like build alumni community, like, and those, I know all kind of things that you sort of, sandboxes that you play in and stuff. So just like somebody who's really committed themselves to leveraging this potential of this medium, I appreciate. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for hanging out. Thank you for sharing all that you did about what you're working on with Professors FM. Ways to check that out and connect with you in the description for the episode. But it's always good talking to you. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll just say, if you're somebody who works in higher ed, on the research or faculty side or the communications side, I would love to chat, to explore opportunities to help, with the training aspect, help with the podcast production aspect, help with the distribution and seeing like, okay, are there different partnerships that we can explore to overall, not just the podcast space, but just elevate all the different forms of research communications that we do. So as Dustin said, you can check out the show notes for how to reach me. But with that, Dustin, thank you so much for the opportunity. Always a pleasure to be on your show.
The Hired Geek Podcast is a part of the Enrollify podcast network. If you like this podcast, chances you'll like all the other Enrollify shows too. Podcast network is growing constantly, and we've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks all designed to empower you to be a better hired professional. Our shows help you find your next big idea and feature a selection of the industry's best as your host. Learn from people like Jamie Hunt, Seth Odell, Dave Kibbolds, and Eddie Francis, as well as so many other of your favorite leaders in higher education. Enrollify is made possible by the support of Element 451. A leading AI-powered, all-in-one student engagement platform helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.